what a high fidelity that is so loud every time. Last week we went over what a high fidelity screen is. We talked about kind of the nuances that go into that and what separates it from a low fidelity screen or a medium fidelity screen. We also talked about when we would use that. So, like, why would we go to a high fidelity screen as opposed to staying at low fidelity, and how do we iterate upon a high fidelity screen? And then we also talked about how to make a high fidelity screen, specifically in Figma. So, how do we add color, iconography, imagery, and typography to a wireframe in order to transform it into something that's a bit more high fidelity? Um, if you were here last week, great. If you weren't here last week, if any of those terms or phrases I said just now sound unfamiliar or like kind of foreign to you, no worries. That won't really impact your ability to participate this week. But I would encourage you to go back and watch the recording of our session from the previous session, just so that you're able to ensure that you understand all of those terms because those will be important if you want to do UX. And last week, a lot of the participants were able to create their, I don't know what's happening here. A lot of the participants were able to create their own versions of what you saw over here. So, a high fidelity version of the Spotify player. I saw a bunch of you guys participate, and it was really great to see because I know a lot of you guys, this is like your first foray into Figma. And it was really cool to see how much progress you guys can make in like an hour or so. Something I did want to clarify from the previous two sessions, we primarily use the terms low fidelity and high fidelity when we were describing types of screens that you might see. But in that, we might have also used the terms wireframe or mockup. And if you've heard of these and you kind of understand them, great. If not, no worries. These are terms that you'll hear a lot more as you start interacting with more researchers and designers and other students, and they have like pretty specific definitions within the industry, like that we use as industry standards. But in my experience with junior designers and other students in UX, sometimes people hear a phrase or a term and they try to use it as much as they can, just because they want to feel like they're using the proper terminology. And at times they use it incorrectly, and that might lead to them like misattributing the definition to something else, right? So in this case, we're just going to do a quick little crash course in terminology. So a wireframe, as you see on the left here, the whole point of why it's called a wireframe is that it's supposed to look like you could have made it out of wires. It should be really, really simple, really bare bones. It should be something that you're able to sketch really quickly, and you're something you're able to iterate upon really rapidly. Once you start adding detail to it, so things like color, imagery, icons, things like that, once you start adding all of those things to it, it transforms into more of a mockup. This is a mockup of what the product will actually look like. It's a very self explanatory name, but mockups have more detail. They have more attention paid to a lot of the different aspects of them, right? They look more realistic. So wireframes, almost by definition, are going to be low fidelity. Mockups are going to be higher fidelity than wireframes. And I say all this because you might encounter people who say, like, oh, I want a high fidelity wireframe. And by the definitions we're using here and for the course and generally around the industry, like a high fidelity wireframe is not really a thing. Obviously, like you can probably guess that they mean mockup, but I just want to clarify so that we're all using the right terms here, and so that you don't have to like go through an experience of maybe talking to a senior designer, maybe in an interview setting, right? And maybe use the wrong terminology and they think you're less knowledgeable than you are. Or maybe you're working with another designer and you say like high fidelity wireframe, and maybe there's miscommunication there and you guys are on the different pages, right? So just trying to avoid any miscommunications where we can. So, with that out of the way, let's go over the schedule so far. We've knocked out two of these workshops. We're on the third one, prototyping today. Next week, Sanjana is going to take back over. She's going to go through components and auto layout. And then I'll be teaching style guides and variables later on. And then on April 8th, we'll be having a Q&A session. So this will be an opportunity for you guys to come at the regular time and kind of work on any of the previous lectures that you guys either missed or didn't get to complete. And that way you can ensure that you're gonna have your participation counted for the certificates that we're gonna be handing out at the end of this program. We can talk more about that later, but it'll also be a time for you guys to just bring in personal projects if you have like personal projects on Figma that you want another set of eyes on, or if you just have questions about the UX industry in general. If you want to talk to people who have been in the industry, that'd be a great time for that. So The first question on your mind is probably, what is prototyping? Like, if you haven't had experience with UX, you might have heard the term prototyping. You might have like a vague definition in your head based on what you've seen in media or in books. But in the world of UX, I am going to define the word prototyping as a simulation of the intended user experience. Now, this is still a pretty vague definition, and that's intentional because even within UX, there's a lot of different types of prototyping, right? UX designers don't always have to be working on a digital product. And so some of them might be working on physical products. And if you're prototyping for a mobile app, that process is going to look a lot different than if you're prototyping for like a door handle, right? So it's like there's a definition to it, and the key parts are that you're simulating the user experience, right? Now, that's not super helpful for what we're doing today, so I'm going to make a more specific definition, and I'm going to say that it's a set of interactive screens that emulate the functionality of a product. The keywords there are going to be interactive and functionality, right? It's going to be something that the user has to be able to interact with. They should be able to touch it or interact with it, click on it, swipe through it, whatever, and they should see the functionality that you're intending, right? If there are features that you want in your product, they should be able to interact with those features. So that's going to be the definition that we're using here. And then why do we prototype, right? Um, the first reason is that we want to be able to communicate our functionality really easily, right? We want to be able to communicate with other designers, with stakeholders, with users, and then with developers. We want to be able to show them exactly what we're talking about, right? If we're showing a user our plans for an app, it'd be a lot easier for them to go through a prototype and kind of interact with it and explore all of those possible functions with a prototype rather than just having them stare at a bunch of pictures of the screens, right? The same goes for a stakeholder. If you're trying to explain a feature that you want to incorporate to, a manager or someone who's above that, it's a lot easier for you to do so if you give them a prototype for them to experience rather than just looking at still images of the screens. The same goes for other designers if you're trying to get their eyes on something, and then if you're handing a design off to a developer, it's a lot easier for you to hand them a prototype so that they understand all of the intended functionalities of your design rather than just kind of seeing each page and then having to guess on those interactions, right? The second thing that we do it for is to represent the user experience when testing. This kind of branches off of the first explanation, but if we're doing user research, it's a lot easier to hand a user a working prototype, even if it's really basic, right? Maybe it's not entirely high depth or high fidelity or super detailed, but having them able to actually interact with something and go through it is a lot better for user testing than if they were to just look at pictures and try to imagine those interactions, right? And then finally, it's great for exploring possibilities. Um, while you're doing the process of prototyping, you'll find that you run into little nuances that you might not have thought of before, right? If you're actually fleshing out the entire prototype, maybe there's interactions that you might not have previously encountered or thought of in what you were planning, and maybe those are things that you need to think of, right? And so it allows you to explore those possibilities and the more minute details. So I'm going to show you an example here. This is created by another designer, but as you see, it's like a approximation of the Spotify desktop app, right? And so rather than just being an image like we created in the last lesson, this is something you can interact with, right? If you go over each of the tabs, like they highlight properly, the play button shows up. If I go into this like the chill mix playlist, I can scroll through it. I can actually see a bunch of different songs. If I wanted to pause a song, I could. If I wanted to skip ahead in the track, I could. If I wanted to go to the search bar, I could do that. Scroll down here. If I wanted to exit out of this, right? Obviously, not all of the functionality is included because that would take forever to prototype, and it's probably out of the scope of what he needed this for. But this is a pretty in-depth prototype of what you would actually experience if you were to use the Spotify app, right? So that's on the very, very, very high end of prototyping, right? But that is not necessarily all that there is from prototyping. Sometimes you might do it with paper prototypes, right? This is a really quick way to sketch out a prototype and show it to a user and get their opinions on it, right? If you're just drawing simple boxes and having the user actually use their finger to swipe through the app or through the experience and tapping on different things to go to different pages, You can get a lot of great information out of that type of user testing. So, with all of that being said, we are going to head into the interactive part of this. If one of the people, if Sanjana or Lily could send the link to the Figma in the chat, that'd be great. Um, and we'll pause here for any questions, but you guys will see a link in the Figma chat. So, or in the meeting chat, you can click on that to join the file. Does anyone have any questions about the stuff we just went over? If so, leave them in the chat. I'll try to get around to them as people join this file. Um, Looks like most everyone is in the file. People are still joining, so I'll wait for a bit more and then wait for any questions that pop up. How common do you use paper method for prototyping? That's not super common for my personal workflow, just because um, a lot of the times, if you're working for a larger company, you might be doing usability testing with people who are entirely online, so it's not really possible to do paper prototyping. But I do know that if you work at certain companies where maybe you're going to the office every day and you're actually collaborating with designers in person, sometimes paper prototyping is something that you'll do a bit more often. I haven't personally done it all that much, but I do know that it is a not an uncommon practice. Um, could I ask where the URL for the file is? It is two messages above of you. So if you scroll slightly up in the chat, it is right there. All right. So I think that's great. We'll have some more time for questions later, but we're gonna move on here. Um, Someone else. Okay, Lily just sent it. Okay. So I'm going to ask that you guys continue to look at my screen for a second before we get into the interactive portion, just because I'm going to explain. Um, Basically, how this is going to work is we're going to go over different types of prototyping. I'm going to explain it with really, really, really simple shapes. And then we're going to repeat those steps in the context of Spotify or the Spotify screens that we have. All right. So if you're not already looking at my screen, please do so. We are going to start prototyping on Figma here. So the first usage of prototyping is going to be navigation. And so that just means how do we actually get around our product, right? Whether it's an app or a desktop website or desktop app, whatever. How do we actually get around, right? Usually, you're going to be clicking on things or interacting with menus or clicking on different titles in order to get around the page. And so that's what we're going to be emulating here. This is going to be a fake, like a mobile prototype, right? So imagine these are phone screens. And the first thing I want to do is I want, when you see this tap screen, I want you to tap anywhere on it and then move to the next screen. So how do I do that? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change from this design tab up here in the top left of our Figma screen. We're going to change from design to prototype, right? So that will get rid of some of the features you'll see here, like the local variables, local styles, blah, blah, blah. We're going to switch to prototype, and you'll see that the first option is device. And with that, we're going to tap or we're going to click on the name of our first frame, right? You guys are not going to be doing this, so I'll be able to go a little bit faster. Just make sure you're paying attention to what I'm doing. So we're going to click on the name of that frame, and that allows us to highlight the whole frame. And you'll see that in prototyping mode, when we go near one of the sides of the frame, a circle pops up. And if we hover over that circle, there's a plus sign. What that plus sign allows us to do is to drag it, and you see an arrow comes out of it. That is going to be determining where this screen leads to, right? So in this case, we're trying to move to the next screen. So we're going to drag it over to the screen that says press, and we're going to let go. And now that arrow is staying there, and there's a menu that pops up. In this menu, there is on click, right? Um, this is the actual interaction that you're going to be doing. And guys, just in case you are not aware, I'm going to be doing this part, and then later on, we're going to be doing it all together. So don't worry about doing what I'm doing right now. So uh, at the top left is on click. If you go to that drop down menu, there are different options for how that interaction is triggered. The second part says navigate to. So that's what we're doing. We're navigating to this next page. There are other options, and we'll kind of get to them later, but not important for right now. This third option is the actual page we're navigating to. So the name of this page is press, and that's what we're going to be navigating to. If you click on it, you'll see all the options for the pages. Don't worry about that for right now. The arrow makes it really easy to follow. And then the last one here says instant. Those are going to be transitions. So those don't really matter right now. We'll just keep it as instant for right now. All right. So on this next page, after we get to the blue press page here, I want it to where if I press on this button, we'll move to the next page. Nowhere else on the page, I want them to be able to click just on this button, right? So we're going to click on this button in order to highlight it, right? And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to grab one of those plus signs and drag it to the next page. And notice that that's coming from the button, right? It's not coming from the entire frame. That means only the button is the trigger here, right? And again, we're going to keep it on click, navigate to. Hover is the name of the next page, the green page here, and we're going to keep it on instant. On this next page, we're going to click on hover because I want them, when they're hovering over this box, I want it to change to the next screen. So what we're going to do, very similar. We're going to click on the hover box, it's highlighted. We're going to drag and drop to the next page. But here, instead of on click, we're going to change that option to while hovering, right? So while I'm hovering over this area, it's going to change to the next screen. And then I'm going to keep most of the things the same except for instant. I'm going to change it to smart animate. That is not super important to explain right now. I'll go over it in more depth a little bit later, but we're going to be using smart animate there. And then if you think about it, while I'm hovering over this button, it'll change into this red button, but I don't have a way to get to the next page, the purple page. And so I'm just going to add an arrow here, and it's going to be the same interactions as we've been doing earlier. This arrow is going to lead them to the purple page if I click on it. And instead of smart animate, I'm going to change it back to instant. And all the other details are the same. Now, on this purple page, very similar to hover, I want them to, when they click and hold on this purple button, it switches to the next page, right? So I'm going to drag from the purple button to the next page. Instead of on click, I'm going to click while pressing. And then instead of instant, I'm going to change to smart animate. Again, I'll explain that a little bit more later. And then the same goes for this arrow. I need a way for them to escape this purple page. So I'm going to drag that arrow over to the last page. And it's going to say on click, navigate to. Final is the name of that page. And instead of smart animate, I'm going to do instant. Now, once we reach the final page, I want a way for them to go to the previous page just to show off that functionality, right? And typically, if you think about it, um, there might be instances where you have multiple ways of getting to the same page. And so in that instance, it's not practical for us to draw an arrow from this page to like the previous page because there might be multiple previous pages, right? And if you think about it, it's kind of like a function where one one y value can have multiple x values, but one x value can only have one y value, right? That might have been confusing, might have been a bad analogy if you are haven't done math in a while, but that's okay. Um, but long story short, there can be multiple routes to the same destination, and it doesn't make sense to try to add an arrow to go to back to all of those destinations. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to drag this arrow and you'll see that there's like a backwards facing arrow that comes on your screen over here. We're going to drag it to that and that sets it to back. So it says on click back and that just goes to whatever the previous page was that you're on, right? So it's a way to just to go to the previous page no matter where it was. And with all that being said, we have now kind of completed our first flow. A flow is a series of screens based on interactions, right? So you'll see that it's kind of like a flow chart. You see those arrows pointing towards each other. Um, it's a singular flow. And when we want to actually see what's happening in that flow, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to tap on the first page of that flow, and we're going to add a flow starting point. You'll see that in the top right of the prototype tab. It says flow starting point. We're going to add one right there. I'm going to name it Dylan Nav. And there are two ways to actually see what's happening here. You can either just click on the screen and then click present here. If you do that, you might get lost in all of the options because it'll probably look like this. And there might be like a bunch of options here as people start to add flows, right? But you can also just go and look at the title of the flow, and there's a button next to it. And if you click on the button, a mini player opens up that kind of shows you what's going on in the flow. So let's walk through it really quickly. If I click anywhere on this page, it should lead me to the next page, and it does. Now here, if I click the button, it should lead me to the next page. If I click anywhere else, it shouldn't do anything. And Figma has a cool function where if you click on an area that doesn't have an interaction, it'll highlight all the areas that do have interactions. In this case, it's just that button. So if I press on that, it'll lead me to the next page. And now if I hover over this green button, it should turn red, right? So if I do that, wow, look at that. It animates into a red button and the background changes. Now you remember we added an arrow here to move to the next screen. We can click on that. And now this button is going to be similar to the hover button, but instead of while we hover it, it's while we press on it, right? So if I click on it and hold, it changes to the teal screen. And again, we have an arrow here to escape. So if we move to the next screen, it's done. And then you'll remember that we have a back button here, and it should take us back to the previous page we were on. And just to show you guys how that back button works, let's say that uh, let's say that this arrow on the green page, instead of going to the purple page, it actually also goes to the final page. So we just changed that prototyping by dragging the arrow and moving it somewhere else. So now if I click there, I should go to the final page. But if I click the back arrow right here, instead of taking me to the purple page like it did previously, it should take me back to the green page. So that's how that works. Um, we're going to implement some of that in Spotify very soon after we go through some transitions really quickly. But I'll pause here for any questions people might have. Um, if you have any questions, leave them in chat. And Sanjana typed a message earlier. So if you guys haven't already done so, there are a bunch of student sections below where I was working. If you want to claim one of those to be your own, as long as no one's name is already on it, just double tap on where it says student section and then type your name. And if you want to change the color of your background, you can just tap on this section and go into the design tab. And there should be an option that says fill. And under the word fill is a box that is colored, and you can change it to a different color. So if you haven't already done that, go ahead and do so. And we'll quickly explain transitions after that. And then we will start actually working on Spotify. I don't see any questions. So I'm assuming, oh, how do I do the mini player? So um, the way I did it was I went into prototype, the prototype tab, right? And now it'll show me different options than I would have seen in design. Um, and I added a starting point to the flow on the first page of my prototype. So on this tap page here, and you'll see that with the blue kind of tag that's right here. And next to the name of that flow is a button. It's like a rectangular button with a play button on it. If you just click on that, it'll open the mini player. And you guys will experience this in a bit here once we start working on Spotify. But I think everyone has had a chance to claim a box of their own. If not, please do so quickly. Um, and we are going to uh, go to transitions. So if you could come back and look at my screen again, this will take another minute or two, super quick. You guys will get to design pretty soon here, so no worries. Just make sure you're looking at my screen again. I'll tell you guys when we are doing the interactive part. So transitions. If you guys have ever played around with PowerPoint, or if you remember when you're like the third grade and you're trying to make presentations look all cool with crazy transitions between slides, this is like the same thing basically. It's just how you transition from one page to another on a prototype, right? So I'm just gonna do it again. I'll go to the prototype tab, right? I'll click on the first box I have of content, and I'll drag an arrow to the next box, right? And when that menu comes up this time, I'm gonna keep it on click. Keep all the settings the same, but on the second setting, right? Instead of dissolve, nope, just kidding. Sorry, that's the name of the destination. Instead of instant here on the third setting, I'm gonna keep it on instant for this one, but this is all of the different transitions that you could have, right? So we'll run through a few of them here. So this one's gonna say instant. Um, the next transition I have going from this yellow box to the purple box is going to be dissolve. The next transition I have is going to be move in from the purple to the green box. Um, and then I'm going to do push for green to pink. Uh, and then from pink to blue, I'm going to do slide out. All of this is stuff that I've just shown you. It's the same thing. We're just dragging and dropping arrows from one piece of content to another. So again, if we add a flow starting point here on the top right, we just add one right there. I'm going to call it Dylan transition. Um, and we press the play button there. It should open the menu player. If I click on this, the first one should be instant change. Now it's going to dissolve into the purple, and now the green box is gonna push in, or sorry, the green box is gonna move in. The pink box is gonna push in. A lot of these look really similar, but if you play around with them with more assets on your screens, you'll notice differences. And then this one's gonna it should slide out, right? So all of those move to the left. Something I do want to clarify is that unlike when you were in third grade and playing around with transitions on PowerPoint, you do want to make sure that the transitions you choose make sense to the user, right? So if you're going forward in an app, say you're getting deeper into like a menu or something, you want to make sure that all the transitions are moving in the same direction, or at least they're consistent, right? You don't want to just randomly have um, a case where like something goes the complete opposite direction for no reason, right? So if I go to like this pink box, and then let's say I'm moving deeper into the app, but for some reason the pink box moves to the right, it's going to confuse a user. So that's just something to keep in mind to make sure the transitions make sense in the context of what you're doing. And now we're going to get to actually go onto Spotify. Um, this is going to be something that um, like I said last week, it might be a little bit difficult to follow just because I'm going to be working on it. I'm going to try to explain things pretty thoroughly. But if you don't have like two monitors, you might have difficulty trying to figure out what I'm doing and then also doing it on your own. So I'll try to explain things slowly. If you have two monitors, great. If not, and you have any questions that pop up, just leave them in the chat, and one of the moderators will try to get around to them. I'll try to explain thoroughly here. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a transition. So you might notice that the first page on your section has like a bunch of stuff that's clipping, like that is leading off of your page, right? There are like three album covers that are like hanging off of your frame. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on the frame. So it should say home page slash feed. You can click on that. So you highlight the whole frame, and you're going to go to the design tab, and then um, near like the middle top above the words auto layout is a checkbox that says clip content. Right now it's not currently checked. We're gonna just check it, and all of those album arts should kind of disappear. And this is something we'll do again later, but that is gonna be what we do right now. So with that being said, we're going to add a transition. So if you've used Spotify before or other music players, there's probably a similar concept. But if you click on the pink-ish tab at the bottom, the one that says "At My Worst" featuring Kalani, um, if you click on that, what happens in Spotify is that it expands into a full screen page that has like all of the music info, or the second page that you should see in your little section area, right? So we're going to create a transition to go between the two. And the way we're going to do that, like I said earlier, right, is we're going to click on the pink tab, right, the little preview of what is playing. We're going to click on that while we're in the prototype mode. So make sure you're in prototype mode and not design. And when we move around that tab, the circles should pop up on the sides of the box, right? If you hover over one of those circles, it should turn into a plus sign, and we're going to click it and drag to the next screen. The next screen being the big pink screen that has the album art on it. And the menu should pop up that gives us options like you guys saw earlier. We're going to keep it as on click. We're going to keep it as navigate to. It should say navigate to song player because that's the name of the next page. And then instead of instant or smart animate or whatever you have, Uh, the actual animation on Spotify, it kind of like shoots up from the bottom, right? Which makes sense because the thing we're interacting with is at the bottom of the page and it's supposed to like kind of expand. So the page comes in from the bottom. So the way we're going to emulate that is we're going to choose move in instead of instant or dissolve. We're going to choose move in. And then you'll see that there are arrows next to it. And we're going to choose the up arrow because it moves in from the bottom. And then below that, you'll see that there's like ease in and there's like a certain amount of milliseconds. That's not stuff we need to mess with right now. If you want to play with that on your own time, feel free to, but we do not need to do it right now. And when you do that, it should automatically create a flow starting point. But if it doesn't, just go ahead and click on your first page again, so the home page, and then go to the top right of your prototyping menu, and you should be able to add a flow starting point. Um, and if you want to rename it to something that makes more sense, feel free to do so. And again, if you haven't been able to, if you still see like a bunch of stuff hanging off of your page, the way we can address that is we just click on our frame while we're in the design mode. And then if we come down a little bit, there's an option that says clip content, and we're going to click that checkbox so that there is a check in it. And that should get rid of anything that's hanging off of your page. All right. So let's see if people have had a chance to build in that. Okay, so it looks like everyone has done that, and we're also going to add another thing to the prototype. We're going to add the ability for us to go back to the homepage, right? And so if you use Spotify, there's like a down button at the top left of the pink screen, and that should just minimize the page, right? You should go back to the homepage and like transform this pink page back into the little preview. And so we can do the same thing. We just act like that's another button. If we go to prototype and we kind of grab one of the plus signs that are on the side of the down, like the caret icon, and we just drag it back to the home page, we can add in that functionality. So we're going to keep all the settings the same, except um, it might automatically say move out because Spotify or Figma kind of understands what you're trying to do. If it doesn't say move out already, change instant or dissolve or whatever it says there in your transition to move out. And then we're going to press the down arrow because it's moving back down to the bottom. So now we should have like two ways to interact with this. And like I said earlier, you guys can use the mini player that shows up next to the name of your flow, right? So I'm going to name this Dylan Spotify. You guys can name it whatever you'd like. If you just use the menu player with that button next to the name of your flow, you should be able to interact with it. So you should be able to press the tab at the bottom, and the next screen should pop up from the bottom. And if you click the down arrow, it should minimize to the bottom. If everyone is able to experience that, that'd be great. If for some reason it's not working, feel free to leave a question in the chat. And I'll give everyone like 10 to 20 seconds to just kind of experience that. All right. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to assume that people are able to follow along. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Someone will probably answer it. And we're going to move on to the next. How do we do the second interactive? The upper one. So you're going to do the same thing that you did for the first interaction, right? Except now you're going to drag an arrow from um, the down pointing icon next to the words Pink Planet. On the left of Pink Planet, there's like an icon. You're going to drag an interaction arrow from that to the previous page. And then for your options in the menu, you're going to choose move out instead of any of the other transitions. And you're going to choose a down arrow. Hopefully that explained it. If not, someone can assist you. All right, so now we are going to move on to the next thing, which is scrolling. This is going to be a part where I ask everyone to look at my screen again. Um, you will not have to do all of this on your own. I will explain it to you, and then we can implement it in Spotify again. So if you can come back to my screen really quick, that would be great. Um, and I'll give you everyone a few seconds to do that. All right. So, um, there are a lot of instances in your prototyping journey that will require you to allow people to scroll, right? It just makes a lot of sense. You'll find a lot of mobile apps that require scrolling downward, like if you're on Instagram and you're scrolling for forever, or if you're scrolling horizontally, that might also be a use case that you find yourself needing, right? There's also going to be times when you need to scroll both directions. So if you think of like a map, like on Google Maps, you might need to scroll diagonally, right? You're not going to only scroll left or right or up and down. You're going to do both. Um, so those are all use cases that we're going to kind of go over right now. So you'll notice that um, on my screen there is like this yellow box and there's orange rectangles that come all the way off of it, right? There's a concept called overflow, which just means that there are objects within this frame, this yellow frame, that come off of the frame like physically. So you'll notice that if you look on the left side of my screen, I'm highlighting this yellow frame and it has all the components that are inside of it. And these rectangles down here are still inside of this frame. And so if you weren't here for the previous lectures, this might be a bit confusing to you. And even if you were, it still might be a bit confusing. But all you need to know is that a frame is a container and it kind of like it is the visible area of the container. So these objects are all inside of it, but they're like off the edge right now. And you can tell that because if you go into the design tab and you clip content, those objects disappear because they're not within the frame, the actual borders of the frame that you can see here. So they're not in the visible area. But we want them to be in the visible area because we want them to be able to, you want to be able to scroll to them, right? And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to continue clicking on this frame, the vertical frame. We're going to go to prototype, the prototype tab. And if you go down a little bit, there's an option that says scroll behavior and it says overflow. And currently it says no scrolling. And we're going to change that to vertical. And all that means is that there is content that is overflowing from this container, this frame, right? And we need a way to access it. And so the way we're going to access it is vertical scrolling. Um, and I'll show you guys what that looks like in a second. But we're going to do the same thing with our horizontal stuff, right? So there's, again, content that is overflowing from this container, right? If you look at it on the design tab and you go to clip content, you'll see that those circles are no longer there because they're overflowing. Um, what it would look like if they weren't overflowing and they were just actually like not part of that frame at all is it would look like this, right? So if I go to clip content, you'll see that this circle is still here because this circle is not part of the frame. I'll undo that really quickly. But again, we have the same problem. So we're going to go to prototype and we're going to go to scroll behavior. And in the overflow, we're going to change it to horizontal. And then again, this is pretty repetitive. The next thing we're going to do, you'll see all of these shapes here are overflowing from this frame. You can see that they're part of this frame either on the left side menu, and you'll see that all of these shapes are part of the frame, or you can go to the design tab and go to clip content, and all of those shapes are gone now. And we're going to change this from overflow no scrolling to overflow both directions. I'm going to quickly show you guys what all of that did. So I am going to go to the prototype. I'm going to add a starting point on the vertical, show you guys really quickly. Figma will allow you to scroll in two different ways. You can drag and drop like you might do with your finger on a mobile app, right? So you can see that scrolling now, or you can just use your scroll wheel if you have one on your mouse or your trackpad or whatever. So I'm scrolling vertically. You can get to the end of the content because I'm able to scroll vertically, which is cool. Here, I'm able to add a starting point, and I'll see that I'm able to scroll horizontally. So I'm going from the start to the end based on horizontal scrolling. And now, if I go here and I add a starting point, you'll see that I'm able to scroll in both directions. So I can go up and down or left to right. And I can go all the way to the end here and see all of my content, right? So I'm able to scroll in both directions. Now, this is going to be the key to what you're going to do in a second here, but there will be instances where you need to be able to scroll horizontally, right? But you also need to be able to scroll vertically, but not necessarily at the same time. So let's say that you want to see the last item in this row right here, right? But when you scroll and you drag over to the right, you don't want everything else to move, right? Because if I click on this frame and I add a starting point and I change the scroll behavior to horizontal, right, you might have that inclination because we're trying to get over to the right here. And we look at that, when I drag it over, everything moves, and that's not what I wanted at all, right? So we need a way to get over there. But at the same time, we need to be able to scroll down. So, and we need to be able to not mess with all these rows, right? So, how do we actually do that? Well, the first thing that you might notice on the screen is it has two menus. It has a top menu and a bottom menu. Those are pretty common in mobile UIs, right? You'll notice that a lot of mobile UIs have like a top menu that just kind of stays at the top of your screen, and a bottom menu. Like if you think about Instagram or something, the nav bar is usually down here. And it stays on your screen. So those two things, we're gonna change their prototype setting so that they don't scroll. Because when you think about it, if you're scrolling, like if I change this to vertical scrolling and went back to the prototype, if I'm scrolling, those moving is not really what your intended functionality is, right? So the way we're going to change that is we're going to click on each of those menus. So right now I'm selecting the top menu, and I'm going to go into prototyping, and its scroll behavior, instead of scroll with parent, which is going to be the default, which just means it scrolls with everything else, we're going to change it to fixed or stay in place, right? And we're going to do the same thing with the bottom menu because we want it to stay there. So if we go back to the prototype here, you'll notice that when I scroll, now the top menu and the bottom menu stay where they are. Um, but you might notice that I'm not seeing all of my content because it is blocked by the bottom menu. And we'll kind of get to that later. But the first thing we're going to address is how do we get this horizontal scroll to work without impacting everything else, right? So the way we're going to do that is we're going to select all of our shapes here, right? And just a reminder, in case like the concept doesn't make sense yet, all of these shapes are part of this frame. This frame is called combined. All of these shapes that are hanging off of it are still part of it. They're contained within this frame. And you can see that if you click content. So I'm going to select this row of shapes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new frame. So I'm just going to right click and frame that selection, and then so this is going to be what is visible to Figma, right? And I'm going to change the shape of the frame to match the actual phone screen that I'm trying to emulate, right? And I can do that just by holding control and dragging the sides of the frame. I'll go over that again later when we are doing it in Spotify. But if I do that, now this frame understands that a bunch of content is overflowing from it. So if I go into prototype, it says it gives me the option to do overflow scrolling. I'm going to change that to horizontal, right? So now if I go into the prototype again and I drag this, things are moving only within the frame. This row is not impacting anything else. I'm able to horizontally scroll just within the frame, right? Um, and so that is now fixed. Now we need to be able to see what is at the bottom of the page, because if I scroll down here, I'm not able to see this bottom row of content. And the reason that happens is because Figma understands that the combined frame, the orange box here, is all the visible area, but it doesn't understand that this box that's this bottom menu, it doesn't understand that that's blocking some of my view, right? And so the way that we can fix that is making a new frame. So we can do that by selecting all of these shapes, right? If I select this frame, it already contains all five of these rectangles. Again, this might be kind of confusing. It is generally pretty confusing until you play around with it a lot. But just know that all five of these rectangles are contained in this frame. And I've already set up frames for this row as well as this row. So I'm going to select those along with all four triangles here, all the frames, and I'm going to make a frame out of them. I can just do that by right clicking and choosing frame selection. And I'm going to reshape the frame to my actual visible area. So the visible area is going to be between the two menus because that's what I can actually see. The menus are going to be blocking me off otherwise. So I reshaped it to that. And again, this is stuff I'll go over when we're doing it interactively. I'm just showing you really quickly for now. But now that I've done that, I'm going to change the scroll behavior within this frame. So only the stuff inside of this frame. I need to change it to vertical scrolling because I want them to be able to vertically scroll through this frame. Um, and with that, if you check out the prototype, we can scroll all the way down to the bottom of what we have. And not only that, but we have horizontally scrollable rows. All right. So that was a lot of information. Let's implement it in Figma, right? So if everyone can go back to their own box, we're going to look at Spotify again, and you'll notice that before earlier when we were doing it, there was a bunch of stuff hanging off of your pages. Now is the time to interact with what was hanging off of your pages, right? So if you click on the home page and you just highlight the whole frame again, just by clicking the name, and you go into design, the design tab, you can check the clip content box and you can uncheck it. So now you see all the stuff that um, is hanging off of the page, right? This is all the stuff that you want to be able to access. And you'll also notice that like there's a third row of content that is being blocked off by the bottom of your UI, and we'll get to that too. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna try to set up that horizontal scrolling, right? So the way you do that again is you just select everything that's in a singular row, right? So in this case, I'm going to select all. I'm just going to click on um, the first album cover that says John Balion mix. I'm going to hold Shift in order to select multiple things, and I'm going to select the Joji mix as well as the Pink Sweats mix. So now I should be selecting all three of those, and you'll notice that like they're tied together with the words under them, and that's intentional. So don't like double click on anything, just singularly click on them. And that should allow you to select the whole album cover and the words under them. So now that I have all three of those selected, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to choose frame selection. I'll give everyone a bit of time to frame the first row in case there's any confusion and you need to ask questions about how to do that. Um, but once you do frame all of them, and you're still highlighting over it, if you look onto the left side of your screen in um, the big menu on the left side, if you're highlighting what you just framed, it should say frame and then there should be a number. So that's how you know you actually created a frame correctly. So we just do that. Um, make sure everyone has done that. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, um, and someone will try to answer them. But again, you can just hold shift to select multiple items at once. Okay, so let's say we've all framed it. We're going to now reshape the frame to be within our visible area, right? And what does that mean? We're going to reshape the frame's width to be matching the phone's width. And the way we can do that is we're going to hold Control or Command on Mac, and we're going to grab one of the sides of our frame, just the side, not the diagonal or anything. So in this case, I'm grabbing the left side. I'm going to drag it over to where the phone screen ends. And I'm going to do the same thing with the right side. So I'm going to hold Control and grab the right side of the frame. If you hover over it, there should be like a horizontal arrow with two arrowheads on the other side. I'm going to drag it over to where the phone screen ends on the right side. So this means that the visible area of the frame matches the width of the phone. All right. So um, that means that half of the Pink Sweats album is going to be overflow. And how do we fix that? We go back into prototype. We change the overflow behavior to horizontal scrolling. Right. So if you go back into your prototype mini player, you should now be able to scroll, and you'll see that that first row it will be horizontally scrolling. And this is a process that we can repeat on the second and third row. So if you had any trouble with it, feel free to leave a question. If you didn't have any trouble with it, great. You can just repeat that process for the second row. Um, and then with the third row, things are kind of like being blocked off. So I'll show you how to address that later if you don't already know how to do that. I'm just going to repeat the process with the second row, set up horizontal scrolling. I'll allow everyone a few seconds to get that done. Um, Again, if you're still having problems with the first row, just let me or one of the other instructors know, um, and they'll try to help you out where they can. Um, And I see that we are about an hour in. This lesson is probably going to last another 20-ish minutes. So if you guys have time, great. If you really have to go at like 8 or something, this will be uploaded. Um, but we'll be doing that for now. All right. So I think everyone has had a chance to do both of their rows. Now the bottom row is being blocked off by some stuff. Um, the way you're gonna want to access that, there's like it's kind of janky, but um, you can stretch out your frame by clicking on the name of the frame, so you're highlighting the whole thing. And if you just hold Control and drag from the bottom of your frame, that'll stretch out your frame a little bit. And once you do that, you can move some of these components down. And so, like, if you click on the preview box and then the nav bar, and you're holding shift while you do it, the preview box and nav bar, and like the little Apple tab at the bottom, if you click on all those, it should like control all of them at the same time, and you can move them down. And if you just hold shift when you're moving them down, it'll keep them aligned horizontally. So now I'm just going to do the same process with the third row. And again, if you don't want to do that and like you're fine with where you are, yeah, that's fine. You don't really have to add this prototyping to the third row. It's just to complete the whole process. So I'm going to frame these, and then I'm going to change the shape of the frame, and then I'm going to add in overflow horizontal scrolling. Right. So, now that we've done that, you'll notice that this is very similar to the example we did earlier. We need to add vertical scrolling. So, how do we do that? Well, I am going to um, select all three of the frames I just made, right? And then I'm going to frame all of those together. So, I'm just going to right click and frame that selection. And I am going to change the visible area again to be what I saw earlier. So this might be kind of difficult to do since you've moved your items down. Um, but if you move your items back up to where they previously were, or just like a good estimate of where they used to be, you'll see your new visible area, right? So I'm going to move it to where it was. And now this new frame that includes um, all three of these items, I am going to change their visible area to right above the navigation bar. This might be a little bit confusing, which is entirely understandable. But once I have that set up, I am going to um, change the overflow scrolling to vertical, like we did earlier. All of these are concepts that we did earlier with the very simple shapes. Now we're just doing them in the context of Spotify. And then I'm going to shorten my frame back up. If you have been doing it a different way this whole time, that's great. That's probably you probably figured it out. But if not, this is something you can rewatch later, or just ask questions now, and we'll try to address them where we can. But once that's all set up, and you go into your prototype, you should. Oh nope, I forgot to make sure that things are staying where they are. So how do I do that? Like I did earlier with the top menu and the bottom menu, I want this preview tab, this nav bar, and this little um, this little Apple thing. I want them all to stay where they are. So I'm just gonna change their scroll behavior to fixed, stay in place. I'm gonna do the same thing with the stuff at the top. You can just hold Control to highlight all of those things, um, and we're just gonna change those to. I guess they are. Yeah, we're gonna change all of those to just stay fixed. And so now, once we go into our preview, if we scroll up, things look. Why do they still look janky? Um,
I think your frame has to cut off before the header.
before the who?
Before the header, your vertical. Oh,
Mm, that's okay. We'll figure that out. That's something that we can play with afterward. But for right now, if you kind of already understand what we've been doing, great. And we're going to move on to Smart Animate. So, with that being said, I'll give everyone a few more seconds to kind of play around with what they're doing. Um, but then after that, if you could come back to my screen, we have like two more really short things to go over. Super simple things, shouldn't take too much time. All right, so I'm going to assume that everyone has had a chance to come back to my screen, see what I am doing. Um, Someone asked, where can we go to find the recordings if we want to go back and review, which is a great idea since that was a little bit hectic right there. We're going to be posting them in the Discord afterward. It should be in the following few days. And again, that's also where you can go to view the last session and the session before that. So we're going to be working on Smart Animate now. This is something you heard me describe earlier. When we were changing the colors of the box, I said we're going to choose Smart Animate, and we'll talk about it later. Now is later. So I want this screen, right? I want it to be where if you click on the picture of the Quokka down here, if I just click on his head, his little fuzzy head, I want him to grow and like be take up the full screen. And then I want a little message to pop up, right? And we can do all this just with Smart Animate. So if I come into here and I show you guys what is entirely on this page, right? If I stop clipping the content, you'll see that I have the word psst on top of the quokka. I have a picture of a quokka. I have the word hello in like a brown type of color. And on this page next to it, if I drag him over a little bit, if I unclip that page, you'll see that it's a really, really big picture of the quokka. The word psst is above the frame, and then the word hello has risen, right? Now, how do we go from this first one to the second one? The answer is really simple. All we have to do is add an interaction. So in this case, I want them to click on the picture of the quokka. So I'm going to add the interaction to the picture of the quokka. I'm going to drag it to the second frame over here. And then I'm going to keep it as on click. I'm going to keep it as navigate to. The name of the second page is peak. So I'm going to keep it there. I'm going to have it as smart animate. And then I'm going to keep all the other settings the same. So you'll see that if I add a flow starting point here, I go into the prototype, I click on the picture of the quokka here, he animates to be really large, and then the word psst goes all the way to the top of the page, it goes off of the page, and the word hello comes up, right? And you'll notice that the color of the fonts change, the size of the quokka change, um, and the position of the words change, right? So Figma is pretty smart in that it's able to recognize if there are assets that are being repeated from one page to another. So in this case, I'm repeating the two words and then the picture. These are all the same, and you can tell they're all the same if you look on the left side of your screen because they're all named the same thing, right? This image is currently named image 25. And then on the other page, it's also named image 25. The same goes for all the text, right? It understands that the text is the same because it's the same content in the text and it's the same font. It's just a different color, which it can handle. Now, let's say I went in and changed the name of this image right here. I changed it to Quokka. Um, Now, if I try to do the same prototype and they're not named the same thing, I go into my preview here. It doesn't do the correct animation that I wanted it to because Figma no longer understands that these are the same asset, right? Because they're named different things. So if I go and name the other image Quokka as well, the prototype should now work again because it understands that they're the same thing. And the same goes for the words. That is how Smart Animate works. There are limitations to it. Like if I, for some reason, both of these words, if I grouped them, so now they're in a group, the prototype will also kind of freak out. It won't understand that those two words are in a group, while as over here they're not in a group. So if I click and do the thing, like we'll see that the word psst right here, it doesn't go back to the top. It kind of just like disappears and freaks out, right? So groups matter for Smart Animate as well as the names of things. So now we're going to implement Smart Animate within our Spotify screens, right? So if everyone can go back to their Spotify screens, um, we are going to do Smart Animate really briefly here. Um, what I want to happen is I want um, to be able to click on the plus sign that's on the pink screen. So the song player screen, there's a plus sign next to the title of the song. And typically on Spotify, if you click that, it'll just change into a check mark, and then that's how you know you've added it to your liked songs. Let's say I want to add a loader screen in there for some reason. Like maybe I understand that this is a market where maybe their internet's not as fast, and so I want to add a loader screen in there so people understand that something is happening, but maybe it's taking a little bit of time. And the way I'm going to do that, uh, oh, and also the loader screen, I want it to be animated. I want there to be motion so that it conveys that something is happening, right? And the way that is all going to work, I've already set up all of the loader screens. So you'll notice that all of them have assets that are named the same exact thing. They're just in different sizes and colors at different points, right? The way we're going to do this is we're going to add our interaction. So in this case, the interaction is going to start with that plus sign button. So I'm going to click on it while I'm in prototype. I'm going to drag an interaction over to the screen that's next to it, the first loader screen, and it's going to be on click. I'm going to navigate to that page, and I'm going to have the transition as smart animate. And then again, the timing doesn't really matter. You can play around with it if you'd like, but I'm going to keep it at default. And then since I want this animation to kind of play without the user having to interact with it, I'm going to do something that's slightly different. So I'm going to click on that first loading screen, the first frame, and I'm going to drag to the second frame of the loading screen. And now instead of on click, I'm going to change that to after delay. Um, and that just means that instead of having it triggered by um, instead of having it triggered by a click, it's going to trigger just after a certain amount of time passes by. And for this, I'm just gonna set it to like 100 milliseconds. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. That's just kind of the spacing that I want at the moment, right? So that means it's gonna wait for 1/10 of a second and then move on to the next screen. And I'm keep all the other settings the same because it's already at Smart Animate, and the ease out for 100 milliseconds here doesn't really matter. I'm gonna do the same thing from the second loaded screen to the third. I'm gonna keep it as uh, after delay. I'm going to change it to 100 milliseconds again, and then keep it on Smart Animate. And then finally, I am going to um, change it from, I'm going to add an interaction from the third screen to the final screen that I want with the check mark on it. I'm going to have it as after delay, another 100 milliseconds. It's going to navigate to song player. Um, and then I'm going to change this interaction to move in from the right and moving to the left. So I'm going to click that left pointed button. I think earlier, I'm not sure what I set this as. Uh, the first transition I set up was Smart Animate. I'm going to change that also to move in from the left. The transition going from the original song player screen to the first loading screen. So I'll give everyone a second to set that up if they haven't been able to already. Looks like most people have it set up, which is great. Um, if you have any questions about what is going on, feel free to leave them in the chat. And again, this is something you can always watch back in case there's a lot of learning happening and maybe you are a bit overwhelmed, which is entirely understandable. So I'm going to set up a new start point just on this song player, just because I want to start there. Um, so I'm adding a new flow starting point, and it's in the same flow, but it's just a different place to start. That will be useful for what you do with prototypes in the future. So I'll just add, or I'll turn on my little mini player, and I'll click the button, and it's gonna do a little animation, and it'll come over to the new page that I had. So let's say I wanted it to last a bit longer. I can always go back and change the amount of time that each of the transitions takes. So let's say I change all of them to a second. Um, so that's 1,000 milliseconds, um, just so that it lasts a bit longer. I can go back to my mini player, click that, and now the animations are taking a bit longer. And then it transitions to the new page. Right. I'll give everyone maybe like 20 seconds to play around with that and see how their prototype looks. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. And then we have one more thing to go over after this. Shouldn't take too much time. And obviously, all of these are very basic concepts. If you want to play around with them later, I would really highly encourage you to do that so that you can understand more of the nuances and you understand it past the point of me just basically instructing you. Um, but yeah, if everyone has had the chance to do that and play around with it, we can move on in like a few more seconds because I see people are still kind of playing around with it, which no worries. Um, all right. I think I see that pretty much everyone has been able to set up the prototype at least. I don't know if it is working on everyone's screens because I can't see your screens, but we are going to, for the sake of time, move on here. So the last thing we're going to be working on, if everyone can come and look at my screen again, is we're going to be working on overlays. Um, this is a pretty simple concept. Basically, it is just what happens when um, you open up a page and maybe you get like a pop-up that comes on top of your page. Like if you just think about a pop-up ad, that's an overlay. If you get like some warning pop-up that shows up when you go to some part of your app, that is an overlay. Those are all examples of overlays. The way we're going to do it today is, let's say I want to have a prototype set up to where if I click this race button here, it's going to say ready, set, go, and then disappear, right? Super simple idea. And the way we're going to execute that is we're going to go and add an interaction here to the race button because that's what I want to trigger everything. We're going to add an interaction going to the stop sign, right? And it's going to be on click, but instead of navigate to, because navigating implies I'm going to a different frame, I am actually going to change that to open overlay. And this means that this overlay that I've set up, this stop sign, is going to appear on top of what I'm currently looking at. Um, and so I'm gonna set it to open overlay. Uh, I want it to move in. I don't want it to just like appear out of nowhere. I don't want it to dissolve in. It's gonna slide in from a direction, right? And in this case, it's gonna slide in from the top. Um, and the motion doesn't really matter. You can play around with that later. Um, I'm going to set it to centered here. So it's going to appear in the middle of my screen, exactly in the center. Um, and then there are a few options on here. So you can set it to close when you're clicking outside of it. So this is a pretty common interaction. If you tap on somewhere that's not the overlay will automatically close. You can set that to checked. And then if you add a background, that's also very common, is it will like darken everything in the background so that you're focused on the overlay instead of having everything still entirely visible because that would be really distracting. So it's going to add a background here. You can change it from black 50% to anything you'd like, but I'm going to keep it at that for right now. So that's going to be the first interaction. Second interaction, I want it to automatically go to set. I want it to do it after a timer. So we're going to do a very similar thing to what we were doing earlier. I'm going to drag an interaction to the set overlay, and instead of on click, I'm going to change it to after delay. The delay I'm going to set to like half a second, so 500 milliseconds. And instead of navigate to, we're going to choose swap overlay. So not open overlay, but swap overlay because it's going to change, it's going to replace the previous overlay, right? So we're going to choose that. Um, and then instead of instant, again, I want it to move in. So let's just choose move in and we're going to choose one of the directions. It doesn't really matter. You can do it at your own discretion whenever we're working on Spotify, but I'm going to set it to move in. And then we're going to do the same thing for the go sign, right? So it's going to be after delay. Let's say it's after 1500 milliseconds, so 1.5 seconds. It's going to swap overlays and then it's going to move in from another direction. And then let's say I want the go to disappear from my page afterward. I don't want to have to like interact with it for it to disappear. So I'm just going to click on go and I am going to go over to the top right of my screen where it says prototype. Under it, there's interactions. You can add an interaction here. That's something you can do on any frame. You can just add a manual interaction here um, because you can't really drag an arrow to like nowhere because I want this to disappear, right? So I can't really drag an arrow to nowhere. So I can add an interaction from over here and I can set it to after delay, let's say another 500 milliseconds. That is whatever. It says 400 milliseconds. I'm going to do the action as close overlay. So now it's just going to get off of my screen after 400 milliseconds, right? So if we come back to our original prototype page and we add a flow starting point, we can click on the prototype and we'll see that once I click race, all of these signs should pop up in order. So I'm going to click it, ready, set, and then go. And then it disappears off of my page, right? And that is something we're going to implement on Spotify. So the last thing we're going to be doing shouldn't take too long. Um, we're going to start on the page we were just on with the check mark. So the song player page with the check mark. Um, and all we're going to do is we're going to add an interaction here. So we're going to select the whole frame. Um, and then we're going to drag an arrow down to this overlay that you see below. Um, it should just be titled overlay. It's like a purple box with a gradient. And this is going to be like an updated terms of use, right? So imagine you open an app and they have an updated terms of use. Pretty common scenario, right? So we're going to set it to after delay because this is not something that's typically triggered by anything other than you opening the app. Let's say after like 1000 milliseconds, we're going to change it from navigate to open overlay. And in this case, I don't want this to appear from any of the sides because that's not how typically these types of menus appear. Instead of move in, uh, we're going to choose dissolve, right? So it's going to dissolve onto your page because instant would be a little bit jarring as well. And then the timing doesn't really matter in this case. You can play around with that if you'd like. We're going to have it centered on our page because that's typically how they appear. Um, we're going to allow people to close it by clicking outside, and you can see what that means in a second when you play with your prototype. And then we're going to add a background. And in this case, it's going to be I'm going to do 80% of black. So black at 80% transparency or opacity rather. So that's set up. And if I go into my song player and I add a starting point and I open it up after a second, it should open up that overlay. And if I click outside of it, it should close. So if everyone has a chance to do that, um, or if they have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Sorry, I didn't realize that you guys' your overlays are on the left side of your screen. So it might be like a long arrow that you're going to have to draw, or you can just grab the overlay and drag it over to the right side of your student section. Um, but yeah, if everyone has had the chance to do that and play around with it, um, that is going to be the last thing we cover here. Um, Lily or Sanjana, could you drop the feedback form in the chat? There's going to be a link in the chat in a second that I would ask you guys to fill out if you have any opinions on how this course has been going. It would really help us to plan future sessions just so that we understand like what is working and what is not. Um, so that chat or that message has been sent. if you guys could go and fill that out, that'd be great. Um, I think Sanjana is going to have something to show you guys in a second here regarding the confusion with scrolling earlier. If you guys want to stick around for that, but again, we'll be having these workshops every week to 2 weeks. The dates are on spot, or the dates are on our Discord and on our Instagram, so you can check those out. And please come back next time, everyone. So Sanjana, you can take over and show off what you realize with the scrolling.
Cool. I will share my screen quick. Also, if you have to go, don't worry about it. We know that it's been a while, so it's totally fine. But if you just want to hang around and learn how we can fix this. So I'm going to start with the screen right here. So the problem that we did is that we framed just this part of it so that when we scrolled, it went over this text. So what I did is I just made this part fixed. So let me show you guys how to do that. I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm just holding Option and just dragging it out if you're curious. But on this copy, I'm going to first ungroup all of these. And we're going to group everything here into a frame. So before I do that, I'm going to click on Home Page or Feed, which is the title, drag out this little thing. And if you want, I recommend just making this a frame because you don't have to keep clicking Shift and moving it again and again. So you can just make this a frame and call it like bottom navigation or something. And you can hold Shift to move it down. And I'm going to take this, all of these elements. I'm holding Shift and selecting everything over here, including the text and all these horizontal frames. We're going to frame this selection. Now, again, you want to make sure that some of the content overflows. So after you do that, we are going to just reduce the size of the frame to right about here. I'm just matching it here. And I'm going to reduce the size of the frame to the top as well. Just gonna move this up first. Oh, so when that happens, I kind of like to maybe just fix this in the bottom too. So if you go to your right side panel and you'll see like these top three justification options and you select the one that's called align bottom, it's like the second to the right one. It'll always stay no matter what your frame size is. So it kind of just sticks in the bottom. So it makes it easy if you want to move things. So I think what's happening here is the order of frames that we have. So this is probably not inside the frame, which is why it's important to keep inside your layers panel. So let me see. Um, okay, so it is inside. I guess it's just going to be cut off. No, it's doing that. Okay, we have to troubleshoot it later. But for now, I'll just show you guys this version. So once you actually get all of the frames, all the content inside the frames, and you have your bottom navigation as fixed. So if you see on the right here, you'll have this, which is your heading as fixed, and you'll have the bottom navigation as fixed as well. And your scrolls, which you'll go here, you'll click on the frame, you go to prototype, and you can say scroll with parent. So this frame is the only one that's scroll with parent. And these two are going to be set to fixed. And if you try doing that, it should work. Again, with scrolling, there's some like small things. You just have to make sure that I think what's wrong here is this element is probably like not over the other ones, or it's probably the order of the frames. So we can try fixing. Oh, I figured it out. I think it's because this frame is fixed. Okay, anyway, so that was just kind of a small thing if you guys wanted to check out how we built this to fix the scrolling. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know.